8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Project Egg Show. I'm your host, Ben Gothard, and today we have the honor of speaking with Bill Bice, a VC who's a founding partner in the Verge Fund. He has also sold one of his businesses to Thomson Reuters and has an incredibly impressive list of accolades that I guarantee you you would find very interesting. So, without any further ado, Bill, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ben. I'll let you do my intro all the time. That was awesome.
Well, I'm so glad that you could carve out the time to be on the show today. So let's jump right in. First question for you today, sir, is what is your story?
I feel like my story is one of being an entrepreneur. So when I was in first grade, I convinced my mom that she needed to buy me the really big box of pencils, which then I took to school. And so the thing was, if you didn't have your pencil, you couldn't go to recess. So I then sold them to everybody who forgot their pencil, and it just seems like natural to me that's just that's maybe that literally shouldn't be the thing you do, but those are the kinds of things that you do. You see an opportunity and you take advantage of it. So you know that was the start. I was very lucky that I had parents that encouraged me to do the things that I really wanted to do. So I got to, when I was 14, I started, I don't really call it my first business, but I started putting on road races. And I don't look like a runner. I was not running, but I would go out and find corporate sponsors and sign runners up to go do these races. I happen to live in this really wonderful place I'm between Albuquerque and Santa Fe, New Mexico, living in the mountains. And we started the Duke City Marathon here. And so that experience of getting to work with Tico and Marge Navarro, who owned this little sports empire in Albuquerque, and learn from them as to what it was like to be an entrepreneur and run a small business and get to do that while I was in high school. That was just amazing. And it gave me the desire and it set me on the path of starting my first software company when I was 18. And the beautiful thing about doing that is I was not smart enough to know all the things that I couldn't do. So I started writing software and ended up building what was a practice management system for law firms, which is not in the normal resume of an 18-year-old. But I'd walk into the corner office of the managing partner of a law firm and convince him to buy the code that I was writing the night before. And it was just great, on the job training for how do you do sales and marketing, and just sort of everything has flowed from that early experience.
I love that. I love that story. So, when you were 14 and you started putting together these events, these races, what was the like what was the catalyst? What was the purpose? Why did you start doing that?
Well, initially it was to get out of going to school. So there's this little strip mall that backed up against our high school, and so I would jump over the fence and started hanging out in the sports store and got to hang out with Tico and Marge, and they would put on events in order to encourage people to buy things like running shoes. And so they needed somebody to help with that. And so I just sort of jumped in and started to do it. And the big advantage is that Tico would buy me the Apple II that I wanted and then the Mac that I wanted, so I could play with all of this stuff. And so I wrote a timing system to keep track of who came across the finish line in what order, and write down their numbers and click the joystick button and match those times up, and then give you the who won in the 50 to 50-year-old men's category, which would be more appropriate at this point in life. And so it was just a great way to get to do, geek out on all the stuff I wanted to do, and actually, get paid to do it.
That's amazing. You mentioned how being exposed to their thinking and their little sports empire in that area it really sets you up for success, and it really set you on a path of entrepreneurship. But what were the specific things that you learned that really, really helped you be successful?
I think it was great at that age seeing the internal working of a small business. I mean, I think that often happens in a family business also. So this was kind of, kind of my family business, and it got crossed over with my mom ran the data center at the Intel fab here in Albuquerque, and so you had this sort of technology piece that got mixed in with the entrepreneurship, and just seeing how you really got to live your own life if you built your own business. So Tico loved Porsches. He was driving a little Porsche 356, which is, sort of the classic Porsche. And so unfortunately I ended up, spending too much money on those kind of cars in one phase of my life. But just seeing him be able to do the things that he wanted to do, and the culture that he created for all the people that worked there that loved what they did, to me, that's really it's how I started falling in love with small business, right? That's what drives our economy. It's what creates jobs. We all want to be part of something bigger, and being able to create that kind of business and create that environment for people, that's a lot of fun.
So it was more of the lifestyle that you saw mixed with the opportunity to tinker with the tech and apply it in specific ways, as well as the culture that you saw him create. Is that kind of what I'm
It was
hearing?
it was really all of those things, and because of that early work that I was doing, that created the opportunity to do. So this was in the birth of the microcomputer industry. And so one of the things that I often joke about is that I'm just like Bill Gates, because I started a software company in Albuquerque, New Mexico. A lot of people don't know that the first personal computer was created here, which is why Alan and Gates moved here to create Microsoft. Basically, the only way I beat Gates is that I started my company was when I was 18. I think he was 20, and then became the world's richest man in the process for a while. And ironically, the very first law firm that I worked with was the firm that represented Gates in the lawsuit he got in around BASIC, which is actually why Microsoft is in Redmond, because he couldn't find any way to pay that bill. Or at least that's the way the story is told here. So it's kind of interesting building a company in an environment where that was sort of the history, but yet it was still very unusual to do it here. So building a fast growing software company here, it was kind of big fish in a small pond kind of thing. It was very unique doing it here, where, if I were out in San Francisco or Seattle, it would just be kind of an everyday thing. So getting to be part of building the ecosystem here has been really rewarding. And I think that ethos that comes from Silicon Valley, it's now spreading across the whole country, and it is just awesome to see that. But this is where it comes from. It starts with you gotta build companies and come up with a product or service that people actually want to pay for, and create a great environment that encourages people to want to be part of that. So I don't really like single any one piece out of it. It was just that whole experience of getting to see it happen. And I've just always had a love of small business that I think comes from that experience.
I love that, and I love how you talked about um, the mindset or mentality of Silicon Valley has now permeated, or is at least permeating, the rest of the country. Because it's interesting to see, back when America was um, first really establishing and growing and moving more westward, it's like the technology was mostly centered in the East. But now it seems like there's been this dramatic shift where so much technology and rapidly developing technologies coming from the western side of the country, and now moving back east. I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, and it's such a fun area to be involved in. I love fast growing, fast moving companies. It's just, it's an exciting thing to be part of. One of the things about doing it in an environment where it's not an everyday thing is that you get to provide that experience to people who might have to move somewhere else in order to get it. And it's really a competitive advantage because if you can, I've always believed that you hire based on attitude and aptitude. Like the sort of skill set base that is so common for hiring just doesn't make any sense to me. Like I'd much rather have somebody who's really smart, because whatever the skills are today, 6 months from now, it's going to be different anyway. So if you're willing to invest in people and give them that kind of opportunity, and you're doing it in a market where there's not a lot of other competition with similar opportunities, then you can really you can afford to invest in your people, and that really helps create that culture and environment that is what makes this so much fun.
It is unbelievable to me, in a good way, how time after time I hear very successful people come on the show and talk about how much more they would rather see the soft skills than the hard skills, because you can teach the hard skills, but it's much, much, much harder to teach the soft skills. So it's almost like people are looking for the soft skills. Or I guess the decision makers at the top are looking for the soft skills, but most people, the majority of people, they're striving towards or striving to gain the hard skills. What do you think about that?
I couldn't agree more, and it's a real problem in the hiring process, right? So there are great HR people out there, but if we want to paint a broad brush, it's a discipline, and so particularly in this market where you're really competing for talent, and recruiters, the HR staff, they're really accustomed to people coming in to sell them, and you really have to do it the other way around now. And one of the ways to really overcome that is if you focus on people who have great soft skills, they're going to be able to apply that talent to just about anything that you need them to do. And it's just so short-sighted to focus on, this is the thing I need right this second. So, I tend to focus in software companies. So you really get deep into hard skills. I need somebody who knows Java. I need somebody who knows C#. Well, that's great for the project we're working on today. I'd rather have somebody who can learn a new language very quickly. So I rarely hire, as an example, I rarely hire 4-year CS graduates. And the reason for that is because you might get a great theoretical understanding, but you rarely get actual practical understanding of how to build applications. I'd rather take somebody, the best person out of a coding boot camp, who's actually built a real application and can turn around and put that to work, and had to learn all that in a very quick time period. That really demonstrates the skill set that I want. And somebody who just loves to code, they spend all night learning new things. That's the kind of person that you want, because they're going to be able to adjust quickly and keep up with just the constant changes.
When you were 18 and you started developing that software to help attorneys, you mentioned how you would go to the corner office and you would convince them to buy your code, the code that you'd written the night before. It seems like that takes a lot of soft skills. I mean, I'm sure you had to have some mastery of the hard skills because you wrote the code yourself, but it really seems like it's the soft skills that allowed you to build that connection with the individual and ultimately convince them to do what you wanted. What soft skills did you actually deploy in order to make that happen?
So the number one thing, so one of the things that you often get asked in legal is, do you have a JD and where did you get it from? And my advantage actually was that I did not go to law school. And so, not particularly sophisticated in the approach, but the thing I did is I actually listened to my customers. And that was particularly unusual in the market at the time, because our competitors tended to be a lawyer who hired a Visual Basic programmer and thought he knew how every law firm should be run, and probably knew how his practice area should be run really well. But legal is actually a collection of a bunch of niches. And so the one thing I was really good at was actually listening to what they really needed. And so to have someone actually paying attention who could then deliver the product that did that. So, I was not a particularly skilled salesperson at that point. That really the only reason I can sell today is because it's something that I'm really passionate about. It was just I actually paid attention to what the client needed.
I love that. I love that listening is the thing because that I feel like that's my job. Like what I do every day is listen. I love that you said that. How did you how did you really listen to their needs? And I feel like this is really important because a lot of people hear, but they don't listen. They don't see through the words to the root or the intention or that deeper meaning or whatever it is. I can't quite articulate it right now, but how do you really listen to understand what the other person is saying?
So, and what's ironic about that is that I would have done so much better in that first company if I had been open to listening sort of on the other side of the business in terms of advice for how to build a business. I mean, it took me a long time to build that business because I had no idea what I was doing. And and then the customer side, I'm not entirely sure why that came naturally, but I really saw the attorneys and staff that I was working with as experts in their field, and I was there to learn from them. If I had just applied that in the rest of the business, it like wouldn't have taken me 15 years to build that business. But eventually I got a team that was really good, and the last 5 years we grew like crazy. We had a 70% 78% average growth rate over those last 5 years before selling the company. Never took in outside capital in order to do that, and so it was always kind of living right on the edge, doing that organically. And so now I try really hard uh, to to really pay attention to people who have been there and done that before, because that is so much more efficient than figuring it out for yourself for the first time. And so it was easy on the technical side, because if I wanted to build a product, I had to understand how they were going to use it. And I try much harder now to apply that sort of across the board, because that's one of the unique things it's an ability that we have as humans. I mean, we keep talking about things. Well, what really sets us apart? And we keep coming up with things that, well, it turns out that dolphins can do that and pigs can do that. But one thing that's really unique about being human is we're able to project ourselves into the future and see what that future would be like. So a great way to take advantage of that is to talk to people who have already done the thing that you want to do and learn from them and actually listen to them. So one of the reasons that I'm really big on CEOs going out to the market and doing customer iteration themselves is because if somebody else tells you, if your head of sales comes back and tells you, oh, the customer really wants this, you then get, well, is he trying to get out of because he's not that good at selling, or is that really what the customer said, right? You don't necessarily believe it. But if you're there on the front line, and it's why in a startup the CEO has to do this, because it's the one person who can really change anything about the company in order to match what the market really needs. If you're sitting on the front line and you're listening to what customers say, then it's just so much more believable when you do it yourself.
Do you feel like projecting into the future, do you feel like we face a challenge in our society today of, and just for historical accuracy, right now we're June of 2019. Do you feel like we are facing a lack of listening, that in this age of social media and everybody has a microphone now, so there's a lot of noise? Do you think that there is a tremendous lack of listening, and do you feel like that's causing problems?
That sounds like a loaded question. I mean, there's no doubt, but I'm a very optimistic person, just sort of naturally, because we have this great inherent ability to sort of overcome every problem that has been thrown at us. So, I'm not sure what the solution is on the way out of that, but technology has played a large part in getting us into that situation. I think it's also possible for technology to help us get past that. These things tend to come in waves, right? And things really go to one side and they tend to come back to the other, and you end up in a good middle place in the end. And I can't give you great logic for why I think that's going to be true in this case, but I think we're going to get there.
I also think is Einstein's love equal and opposite reaction. And I totally could be wrong. That may not be Einstein, but somebody much wiser than myself said that. So yeah, definitely could see that how we almost have to go totally on one side and then overcorrect a little bit and then come back to the middle. I think you're absolutely right about that. Um, but yeah, I'm just fascinated because it does seem like the more connected we get to the world around us, weirdly enough, the more disconnected we get from the world around us. Like, with and I'll give you an example. I'm 24, and so whenever I go out to eat with my friends, let's say there are four of us at the dinner table, at any one time, two out of the four of us, and I'm just as guilty of this as anybody else, are on our phones. And it's like, okay, well, you're texting and you're connected to somebody on your phone, but then the actual human connection around you is getting neglected. It blows my mind. So yeah, I'm just interested to understand like how you feel about that and what you think, like how you think we're going to progress as far as the connection goes between human beings.
So it certainly creates more conflict on the individual one-on-one level. But at the same time, the way that we have interconnected on a worldwide basis, it's really the thing that has the most hope at preventing significant conflict, right? Economic dependency is the best way to prevent that kind of conflict. So whoever it is that we're in conflict with, raising their standard of living is by far the best way to be in a position that avoids that in the future. Like we get everybody up to, well, there's certain aspects of U.S. living we don't want people to have to deal with. But if overall we raise the standard of living, every time that's increased, the end result is not only better off world population, but overall it's less conflict. And we have less violence today than we've ever had. Nobody feels that way because it's overreported, and what violence does occur gets an immense amount of focus. But overall, this is the safest time period as human beings we have ever had on the planet. This is a great time to be alive. Maybe there will be a time in the future that's even better, but when you think about like the perfect time, we are extremely lucky to be here right now, having this conversation.
I agree. I agree wholeheartedly because, like, who would have thought, maybe even 50 years ago, that you know that we would be able to do this, that we would be able to have a face-to-face or quasi face-to-face conversation when we're in two different parts of the world and be able to broadcast that to the world. Not to mention broadcast it to 18 platforms at once. Like, that's amazing. That's amazing. It's incredible. It really is. It really, really
Absolutely.
is. It almost begs the question, some of the most incredible people in history that accomplished so much, what would they have been able to do with the technology of today?
Well, and I think what's really interesting is what about all the people that we don't know who they are because it wasn't captured. They didn't have the ability for their voice to be heard in the way that it can be today. So you're just talking about a completely different world we live in that creates opportunities that just didn't exist before.
I love that. So, speaking of opportunities, when you moved um, from that business of yours where you were serving law firms into more of the VC space, I mean, you're essentially creating opportunities every day, and you're giving a lot of resources to people who can then change the world. Why did you decide to go that route once you sold your business?
Well, I was going to go and do uh, more startups anyway. So that was really just a vehicle to do the thing I was going to do, and to be able to do it with partners who had the same approach and the same desire that I did. Just just made it even more fun. But I recently counted it up, and I've founded or invested or been the primary advisor in 27 companies, and it's been a great experience to see that across so many different companies. And there's a real pattern there, because the thing that has it's always the hardest is the go to market, right? So you put all this effort into creating a great product or service, and then whether it pays off or not is how good are you in the go to market. And where we've really focused on that and executed well, of course, we got a much better end result. And so that to me is a really interesting problem, because it applies across just about any kind of business. And it's this weird discipline where you go into marketing so that no one can figure out what you do. And it should be the opposite, right? That's just not the way that it should be.
Wow. Why do you why do you say that the go to market is the most difficult thing? And I know you mentioned a little bit about it, but I'm really interested in drilling down into that. Like, why is that the hardest part?
Well, there's so many elements of the go-to-market that are really challenging. So even, the CEO needs to be the main salesperson for a startup for a period of time. Part of it's that iterative process at the beginning. Part of it's just representing the company in the market. Making that jump to where you have a reproducible sales process is really tough to do. I've made this mistake many times. Like I think, okay, we've got it down. We've got happy customers. I'm able to sell it. It's going great. So then you go hire a sales team. And the number one mistake is you go hire 3 or 4 salespeople all at once and say, hey, this is what I did. Now you just do exactly the same thing. It never works. So until you really focus on making that a reproducible sales process, where you truly have process around it, and it's something that you can turn around and teach to people, then you're not ready to scale. And there's always so much pressure, particularly if you have outside investors. There's the vast majority of companies should never take outside investment, and this is one of the core reasons, is because it creates this artificial pressure that you have to grow and you have to perform, and it tends to create mistakes that wouldn't have happened otherwise. We're going to go hire 5 salespeople instead of 1, and really make sure that we got this figured out with the 1. And that's even when you have that pressure, that's really the route that you just have to do, because it's very much a go slow in order to go fast kind of approach. But then you get to that next step. Okay, now we've got a sales team that's functioning. We really have done a good job of training them and supporting them and giving them the resources that they need. Well, then to go out and get marketing for your company, right? If you want help in marketing in your small business, there are literally thousands of options to help you, which is another way of saying that nobody's really figured out how to do it well. Because otherwise there would be like an obvious option. This is who I go to when I want help with my marketing. And that just doesn't exist. And none of the options are really great today, right? You either got to hire a whole team internally to do it. It's almost impossible to find one person that can execute on a full marketing program. You just can't get all those skills into one human being. So even if you find somebody who's really great at strategy, they've got to then turn around and hire a bunch of other people to execute on the individual pieces. There's lots of great agencies out there. You go hire an agency, a lot of business owners are not willing to write that big check month in and month out for a long enough time. It would pay off if you stuck with it, but to get there is really tough. And it's a long-term commitment, doing things over and over again that a lot of business owners don't truly understand, because it's just a different kind of discipline. So it creates all kinds of challenges to be great at marketing in your business. And it's an area that we need a lot more transparency than exists today, right? It's this sort of black magic art, and that just needs to change.
Do you feel like that transparency is something that's going to come from maybe an individual who does build that skill set, or from one of those really expensive agencies that just documents the process and shares it? Or like, where should that transparency come from?
So I think it started, right, because so there's great quote that got attributed to John Wanamaker, who created the first department store, which is, I know half my advertising is wasted. I just don't know which half. So now we have the opposite problem, which is we know how particularly if we're talking about digital marketing, which in a lot of cases is about the only marketing that's left. We know how every single dollar is being spent. We know every engagement that we're creating. We know every action that every prospect is taking. So now we have too much data, but the knowledge is there. It's in the data. So it's really a matter of building the right system so that you're able to get that view of understanding what's really happening. So, I often talk about it as the customer journey. We really want to understand what's happening to our prospects across all the different channels that we're talking to them. Are we really getting our story across? Are we pulling them down the funnel and improving the conversion rate at every single step? So the tools and the data are there now. It's more a matter of bringing it together. It's just that so much of the market is sort of either one side or the other. It's either we do technology or we give you expertise. And what you really need is to bring both of those together in order to truly execute on this, because we've got to have scale and efficiency in order to make marketing really, really work.
In your experience of working with those 27 companies in the various forms that you have, in addition to that go to market um, point, what were some of the biggest discoveries that you made, the most impactful things that you've learned?
So I've been doing a lot of, so a lot of those, the majority of those were B2B companies. I've been doing a lot of work in B2B marketing. And I think the thing that's really interesting, particularly if we're talking about sort of more impactful kinds of sales, so higher ticket kind of things, it's really the same strategies and tactics apply across a really wide swath of the market. And that's really in contrast to B2C, where it tends to be very nichey in terms of what works. So one of the reasons that I really like talking about B2B is because it's really easy to lay out. This is the core foundation that if you got a B2B company, here's the stuff you need to do. Because if you do this, I'm sitting here watching the data. I know that it works. If you make a long-term commitment to doing that, then it really pays off. And it's that day-to-day in the trenches work that is where the ROI is in marketing. Everybody wants to focus on like the really fun, branding stuff. Like, let's make a new logo. Let's change the colors. Let's, run an ad somewhere. That's not what gets us results. It's the really hard, just every single day in the trenches. Like, are we capturing all of our prospective clients? Are we following up on all of them? Are we staying top of mind with this audience that we're building? Like, that audience, it's the most undervalued asset in the vast majority of businesses, are the clients and prospects that you already have that you're not spending enough time talking to. Like, there's so much business just sitting there waiting if we just do the right things with that audience.
I love that. I love that. So it's almost like we have the opportunities right in front of us, but because we're chasing the fun, rebrand, new color, run an ad here, we're not actually giving the in the trenches, serving your audience, staying top of mind, following up, nurturing. We're not giving that the time and effort that it needs. Therefore, we're leaving a ton of money on the table.
Exactly. It's the low hanging fruit. Everybody wants new leads. I want new leads, but it's so much more effective to focus on what's already happening. Let's improve the conversion of what we already have, and let's get really good at capturing the people who are already paying attention to us and get the most value out of that. And so until that system's in place and we're really optimizing the value of what's already happening, it doesn't make sense to spend the money to go out and get new leads, because you're not gonna get the value from that anyway.
That's brilliant. Because once you build that system of getting a customer, of once you've gotten a customer, or once you've gotten a new lead or a visitor or prospect, and mapping out that journey and bringing them through to conversion, that that's like a very repeatable system. Once you have the infrastructure built, Then you can go to the new lead and just funnel way more people into that.
Absolutely. And it's so building that marketing system is absolutely the goal. And the thing you have to feed it with is really great content that is not about you, but is about what your audience cares about. What are the challenges they have? Of course, you want it to relate to what you do, but it's the number one mistake in marketing, which is talking about yourself. And that seems kind of ironic, right? The whole point of marketing is to promote myself, but the best way to do that is you, you have a really unique perspective on the market, because that market you're serving, you get to see it a cross section across hundreds or thousands of businesses like that, where the business owner you're selling to, or that CEO that you're selling to, they really only have the experience in their one company. So you have this great ability to bring them insights that are difficult for them to access. And if you take that insight driven approach to your sales and marketing process, to the content that you're delivering, then you're giving great value to your prospective clients, whether they ever work with you or not. And that creates the kind of relationship that then drives more word of mouth, which then, becomes this self-fulfilling, organically driven process when you really get that marketing system working.
So if if we're thinking about it in terms of the journey and in terms of content to help ascend people, or to help guide them through that journey, do you find that you need specific content for each piece that leads to the next piece that guides them through the journey? Is it like one continuous story, or is it something else?
Well, there are a lot of people in the marketing automation world that do put that level of complexity into it. I like to break it down into sort of two simple levels. We've got nurturing campaigns that are, we need to tell our story to someone who's new, that's at the top of the funnel. And by telling them that story over time, because nobody's going to get the full impact of who we are in the 15 seconds they spend on our website. We need to instead capture them, tell them that story over time. And that sort of level sets them. That gets to the point where they understand who we are, why we're here, why we do what we do. And then if we put out a regular stream of that staying top of mind kind of content. So it's really those two streams. If you do those two things really well, you don't have to get into this really deep thought of, okay, well, how do I move them from, this stage to this stage to this stage? As long as you're addressing things that are really what they care about and you're delivering insights to them, then you're going to stay in front of them. And when that opportunity comes up and they're ready, so part of this is just human nature, right? Salespeople are going to focus on selling to people who are going to drive a commission check in the next 30, 60, 90 days. But you have tons of great prospects coming in that 6 months, 12 months from now are going to be a great opportunity. And getting people to use a CRM system is like pulling teeth. I mean, it's impossible. We all have them. We all underutilize them. So you've got to build in process and approach that gets those prospects captured. And then if you're using marketing automation to automatically follow up on them, you don't have to rely on following up on that lead that's really not going to come to fruition for 6 or 12 months later, but they're going to come back around. So that's why I really talk about this as a long-term commitment, because that's where you really get the value, is when those kinds of things start to pay off. So I think it's really easy to make it too complicated, but in the end, it's let's capture our prospects, let's build an automatic follow-up with them, and then let's be really great at talking to that bigger audience that we have built. And if we're in the B2B world, LinkedIn is such an amazing platform to take advantage of right now. It's like Facebook was 10 years ago, right? It's really straightforward in comparison. And it's so much easier to use that as a way to, if you're going to build that content, then you might as well go on LinkedIn and really take advantage of it and build that larger audience. And it's really easy to understand how the algorithm's working and what's creating engagement, and you follow the data and you just keep iterating on it. The hardest part is I keep talking about creating content. That's the hardest part. Like, how do you create great content? Because every business owner comes to the table and they're full of ideas and they're like, yeah, I'm gonna write that stuff. It's so difficult to look at a blank screen and actually do that. But yet, what the ideas are. So the way to solve that problem, the way that we do it is go out and find industry experts that are writing for the websites, writing for the publications in that market. They already know the market inside and out. I can sit down with a business owner and in half an hour get 6 months worth of editorial content and have somebody else write it. And that's how you solve that problem of getting regular, consistent content. So if it's been 2 months since you've sent out an email, then that's not going to work.
So when you sit down with that business owner, how do you extract 6 months of editorial content from them in 30 minutes? That's amazing.
The ideas are almost always there. Like they know what their customers care about. So the business owners that I love working with, my very first question will be, so where did your latest couple of clients come from? And what I really want to hear is, oh, it was a referral from so and so, because that tells me it's the kind of business where you can really put this kind of marketing to work and have a great result, because they're taking care of their customers. Referrals are coming in, right? So they've done all the hard work. Now all we got to do is take advantage of that and build that marketing system around it. So they know what the challenges are that their customers are having. And that's literally all you got to do is start digging into that. Well, what are the problems you solve for your customers? Why are those problems for them? What are the patterns you see across the businesses like this that you serve? And it just starts coming out. And it's really easy to capture all those ideas. You do a little bit of industry research behind those, and you can flesh that out into the 3, 4, 5 bullet points that you want covered in each of those things very easily. And then you add that to somebody who's a subject matter expert who knows that area really well. Suddenly, instead of it being really difficult to come up with great content, it becomes really easy and just a regular process.
Well, to everybody who's listening and watching, I really, really hope y'all have been paying attention to what Bill just said, because he basically just solved your content problem. Like, that was massive value, Bill. Thank you so much for sharing that. That was awesome. So once we get our go-to-market strategy, we've gotten these these nurturing sequences. We've got the top of mind content. We've drilled down and we've figured out these problems that we need to address in our content. We've worked with the subject matter expert to create the content. What else is there? Like, what else do we need to worry about?
Well, so we mentioned LinkedIn. So if we've got that system in place, the next thing we want to do is grow our audience. And I'm really interested in finding ways to do that where I don't have to pay for the advertising. And so running connection campaigns on LinkedIn is the perfect way to do that. You do have to sign up for Sales Navigator so that you can really get narrowed in on who you want to talk to. But if you're great at building those queries and really identifying, here's who our great prospect is for us. So we know what that looks like. Now let's go find the 600, 700 more people just like them that are already in my network on LinkedIn. And if you don't have a big network on LinkedIn today, then use the feature to import your address book as the very first starting point so that you build a big network. Almost the biggest problem with LinkedIn is that we've got to convince people, what, this is a networking event. It's actually the world's ideal networking event because you get to invite only the people you want to meet. You don't have to eat a bunch of calorie-laden hors d'oeuvres in the process. And you just imagine that you get to go to a networking event where you only talk to prospective people that make sense for you to be talking to. And if you come in with the attitude that it is a networking event and I am here to help the people I'm adding to my network, if you don't look at it as a lead generation activity, guess what? It will become a great lead generation activity by looking at it as networking. So it's really the perfect way to add audience growth that it costs money in the sense that you've got to run those connection campaigns. We'll average 40 to 50 new connection requests a day, every single day on every profile that we're doing this for. So it takes effort to do that. But compared to spending money on pay-per-click or display advertising, it's an absolute steal because we're talking to exactly who we want to talk to. And we get 2 bites of the apple. We get that. So some of the times you reach out to somebody, connect with them, and it just happens to be that when you connected with them, they were thinking about the kind of problem you solve. And there's an opportunity. And so I'll follow up a newly accepted connection request, typically a day later, ideally at the same time they accepted the connection, because people often check LinkedIn at the same time. and follow up with an article that I've written that is not selling what we do, but talking about the kinds of problems that they're having. And that's what creates conversations, which then creates new opportunities. But then you take the content that you're creating and you publish that on LinkedIn over and over again. And unlike Facebook, where like if you publish the same content, that's an absolute no-no. But on LinkedIn, you can publish the same content over and over again. Just take different pull quotes from it and use the same article. So if you do just 2 or 3 new articles a month, you can completely fill up your LinkedIn feed with great content. So my goal is for there to be 4 to 6 things every week on every profile that just keeps you constantly in front of your audience. And once that audience gets a little bit larger, then it starts to organically grow. So once you get to like 5 or 6,000 connections, you ought to change the button in LinkedIn from connection to follow, because then you'll just get people who automatically come to you and follow your profile because of the great content that you're putting out. And now you're just growing this audience of people who want to pay attention to you because you've turned yourself into a thought leader in your market. Now, after you've done all of those things and it's really working and you followed the customer journey, you truly understand we are getting our message across, we're telling our story, we've optimized the conversion at every step of this process, then we might actually spend some money on advertising, because now we can really evaluate whether that's working. And the reason that absolutely has to be the last step is because Google is the master at pulling out all of the value in that transaction. Right? They have 25,000 engineers whose job is to extract the maximum amount of value out of every single ad that you place. So are you really going to beat them at that game in being really good at picking your keywords and bidding? Maybe, but chances are that in the end, Google will extract all the value out of that transaction. So if you don't have that full marketing system set up, there's just no way you'll ever win. And if you don't really understand the long-term value of your customers, so it's not just the first sale that you get, but what is the overall LTV that I get from a customer? And frankly, if you're not willing to spend something in the 50 to 60% range of that per customer acquired on advertising, then don't start advertising, because you're not going to be able to get there. Google is so good at extracting that value that you will not make money on the first transaction, other than in very specific niche cases. You're going to have to be really good at acquiring the customer and keeping them and getting that LTV in order to make advertising pay off, which means that the vast majority of companies can get exactly the growth they're looking for without spending a dollar on advertising.
Wow. There are some times when you ask a question and you get so much more that you bargain for, just really makes your day. Well, that's exactly what just happened. That was awesome, Bill. And I love what you said about really building that organic strategy first. And again, setting up your infrastructure before you invest in paid ads, because you may not even know what the LTV, the lifetime value of your customers are. So how do you know if your advertising is actually working? Because you may acquire a customer for $120. You may be saying, oh my goodness, I don't want to spend $120 for a customer. But if they're worth $300 over the lifetime of that customer, hey, that's profit. You're profiting there. So it actually is working, but you may not know. You may not realize it.
And every time
And
you do that, what you've really done is just invented a printing machine for money. Right? So it's a wonderful thing to get there, but you have to build all that infrastructure, you have to build that marketing system in order for that to ever work. It never works like right out of the gate. And then one of the things you really have to be prepared for is that your cost almost always goes up as you scale up. It's because everybody thinks, well, as I spend more money, this should become more cost effective. But in advertising, it does not work that way. There's almost always a sweet spot, which is much more cost effective at lower volume, and then it goes up. And eventually it goes back down. But most companies I'm working with are never going to get to the kind of volume where we get to the other side, where the cost goes back down.
well, a lot of the times, at least in my experience, what I've found and from the people I've talked to is that the reason that happens is because you start off really niche down to where you're talking to your ideal customer, and then you kind of run through those ideal prospects. So then you have to spend a little bit more because they're not as perfect of a fit. But then when you get big enough, you kind of overcome that because you're such a big brand and you have so much influence and mass market appeal that it kind of overcomes that lack of specificity.
Yeah, that's a great explanation.
Well, Bill, clearly you're an expert in this, and it's fascinating that it really seems like your passion is building out the go-to-market strategy. And I mean, is that do you feel like that's an accurate statement?
Well, yes, because that just the thing I really care about is helping business grow. Like what's the easiest way for us to improve the state of being that we're all in, and it's to create more growth. And the hardest part of that is the go to market piece, right? Just spent so much time struggling with that over and over again in so many businesses. And I'm a programmer at heart, so I just saw it as a technology problem and as a data problem. So how do we understand that in a way that we can come up with a solution for it? And I tried really hard to solve it purely with technology, which you just can't do. We don't have the AI system yet that's going to figure out your marketing for you. So you've got to be able to get the technology and the expertise put together in a way that really delivers what you're looking for. Right? That's the secret about HubSpot. HubSpot's a great system, but the problem is they don't tell you when you're subscribing that you got to hire two people to run it for you. And that's where the rubber meets the road part, and it's the two people that are the challenge. So you really need both of those components, and a lot of companies would rather just have the end result. I just want the marketing automation to happen. I just want all this stuff to happen, and so they're just the ideal solution is that's what I'm trying to create. I think we're all better off if we can help small businesses be much better at marketing, uh, just because it's such a driver for our economy, for our employment, all those things that we started this conversation on. And yet the gap between the marketing sophistication of your really large competitors relative to that small business has gotten so huge as marketing has gotten more complex, right? The tool set and capabilities that your large competitors are having is just ridiculous at this point. So we've got to bring up the game of smaller businesses in order to keep that working.
I love that. I love that. So, in your many years of experience now, having worked with so many companies and figured out so many very interesting and effective strategies in business, on more of a personal side, how has all of this impacted you? I mean, how have you grown as a person, as an individual, by being on this journey?
So I really thought, and it was the approach I took. So when I was your age, I just powered through it, right? I could work 70 or 80 hours a week. I could make a lot of mistakes and just sort of overwhelm it with just, pure force of will. Turns out that's not necessarily the best approach in life. It's a really stressful way to go about things. So I put a lot of focus on the work wiser, not harder approach. Meditation has been huge for me because it's given me a perspective on. It's so easy to get stressed out by all these things that we are talking about, and I find it really helpful to step back and relax and really spend the time to learn. It's definitely a go slower in order to go faster approach, and it works so much better. So I'm in a much calmer and happier place today because I don't just try to push through absolutely everything.
That's so interesting. It's fascinating to me that that was what stuck out to you when I asked that question of it almost seems like being more balanced and achieving um, more, I guess balance is the right word. Why do you think that that was what came to mind when I asked you that question?
Well, so there's an irony here because I'm driven. I really care about accomplishing a lot, but there's a certain math here that's at work, which is You just measure, okay, here's what I can accomplish if I'm focused more on moderation. I get this done, but I get this done every single day, compared to sort of the normal approach, which is just, absolutely going to the max and then hitting the wall and then having to recover. So I got more done, but then I went to zero. And for the vast majority of people, adding up that moderation day after day after day adds up to a whole lot more than the just, driving ourselves insane, which, I've done for a long time. And it gets to the point where it takes a real personal toll. And it's a lot more enjoyable taking that more moderate, measured approach. And it turns out that it really is about the journey. Like you spend so much time in building a company focused on the end result, this exit that we're going to create. Well, guess what? You get that exit and then you go create another company and just, the journey starts over again. So if you're not enjoying the process of getting there, I mean, nothing really amazing happens when you sell the company. You have more money than you did before. Your life doesn't really fundamentally change. In fact, in a lot of ways, it can be a setback because you tend to have so much of who you are tied to being part of that company. And so that whole cycle is a really great education to go through.
Do you feel like by going through that education, going through that journey, that at your core, you fundamentally changed?
I think there's this illusion that we all feel like we're fully formed at whatever point in time we are now. Right? There's been great research on this, and nobody predicts the level of change that they're going to have, over the next 10 years. But yet, if I go back in time, I can certainly see that it happened in the past, even though I don't believe it's going to happen in the future. But yeah, we know it is, right? You're going to be a completely different person at 34 than you are 24. It's still going to be you, but those experiences have such a change on who you are. And yeah, and that, it's changed me quite a bit because I'm much calmer than I am today. But when we were talking about that experience of going out and selling when I was 18, I was a very strong introvert, and I had to overcome that in order to accomplish what I wanted to do. And at my heart, I'm still an introvert, but yet here I am talking with you because I want to, right? I enjoy doing this. I'm passionate about this thing that I do. If we were talking about some other random subject, I probably wouldn't wouldn't be doing it, wouldn't get excited about it. So now it's natural for me to do this because I've done it enough, and it's part of what I need to do in order to accomplish the things that I want to do. So yeah, that experience absolutely changes us.
So I have two more questions for you. Then we'll go ahead and wrap this on up. First is, how did Zeke get his name?
So Zeke is right behind me. So Zeke was the mascot for our first company, ProLaw, which was the legal software company. And so legal is a market that's full of like the scales of justice and sort of this standard imagery. And so one of the best things you can do in marketing is find a way to stand out. And so bringing a zebra into the legal market was a good way to do that. And we would go to trade shows, and we got a zebra suit. And every trade show, there was somebody who would volunteer to wear the huge zebra head and the full zebra costume and not talk to anybody, just like walk up and down the aisles of the trade show. Just like, yeah, there's a zebra walking around. And at some point, somebody named him Zeke because that seems like a great zebra name. So now in the legal market, there's a friend of mine that runs a great company called NQ. They have a kangaroo, and there's somebody with a lion and somebody with a panther, and it all started with the zebra.
That's amazing. I never knew that before. That is so fascinating. Um, right on, Zeke. Right on. You started a new trend. Um, and then last question for you today, Bill, is and this is a more personal question. Um, But what question should I be asking you, specifically you, that I just wouldn't think to ask?
That's deep. Um, the thing that one of the questions that I love is the what is something you really love to do that people might not know? Because I think it gives you a perspective on people's personality that doesn't really come out, particularly when we're spending so much time talking about the business side of things. And so, for me, I grew up here, spent a ton of time traveling, particularly growing that first company, like going everywhere. And I never really found a way of life that I liked better than what I have right here. And a big part of that is I love to mountain bike, and I've got 200 miles of trails that are in the mountains surrounding me where I live. And there's no doubt that I would have made a lot more money if I had moved to Silicon Valley in the 90s. But to give up that way of life was just never worth it to me. And so, that connection with nature and just being able to go out the door and ride a trail whenever I want to, it's just it's such a perfect place to be. And I think everybody's got to find that thing that just works for you, that's worth having, sort of no matter what. And that's what it is for me.
That's awesome. Well, thank you very much, Bill. I really do appreciate your time today, and I'm very grateful that you would share some of it with me. So thank you.
It's been a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
And to everybody who's watching and listening, I want to say thank y'all very, very much. Your time is very valuable, and I am also grateful that y'all would choose to share that with us today. So thank y'all very much. I love you. You know I do. And I will see you on the very next episode. Take